All right. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about this concept of innovation. Okay, and so in this session, we're going to talk about why innovation, maybe some examples of things that we've seen in the past and the present, how we do innovation here at Integrity Capital, and then really what's next. And so when we, the first question always is why innovate? Like, who cares? Why does it matter? And so I'm just going to go through a couple of reasons why. And the first one is just because it aligns with our vision of proactiveness. Okay. So, this idea that we want to be the most proactive commercial mortgage company in the world is that in order to do so, it's critical that we continue to innovate, right? Because we're trying to come up with ways to be ahead of the curve, a few steps ahead. So, in order for us to be a proactive company, then we need to be innovative. And so it just aligns really well with our company vision, mission, values. In fact, if you look at really the mission side of it is to leverage technology, and so that is part of the strategy or the tactic that is necessary in order for us to get to that place of being proactive. The second thing is because it allows us to serve better. um, you know with innovation, there are these opportunities to be able to serve a broader audience, serve in a different fashion. You saw a lot of people during the COVID learn all these different innovative ways to continue to try to serve people. And so the more we are able to innovate and think outside of the natural box, the more we can really serve better. The third one is just because it creates more peace of mind. So the more we are coming up with innovative ideas and new and fresh things that can allow us to be distinct, it's just going to create a sense of more peace of mind because we're going to continue to have this sense of growth, which will create a sense of peace of mind. The fourth one, which you'll probably hear a lot, and I think there's some truth to it, is if you're not innovating, you're dying. As a company, if you're not growing and you're not changing and you're not continuing to innovate, you're just kind of moving in a direction that eventually just fades off. And so we just have to keep thinking in terms of, what's the next thing we have to be thinking about. Otherwise, you're getting into a place of stagnation. One of the things John and I talk about a lot is, we've had a lot of success here, and we have a lot of success right now. But success can be the greatest detriment to success. Because when you get into a position where you're seeing a lot of success, what ends up happening is you start to get complacent. And if you think about this in just a lot of areas of your life, when you get to a place where you feel like everything's rolling on all cylinders, you can have a tendency to coast. That's a natural byproduct, I think, of getting into a restful place. Spiritually, people always say that, my best times was when I was going through rough times, and my worst times is when things are all going well, because we can have this tendency to just sort of lax or let off the gas a little bit. And so that's the fourth one. The fifth one is it's part of our leadership proactive characteristics. So if you guys remember, we went through those 12 leadership proactive characteristics that we have here at the firm. Is one of them is to reinvent and then reinvent. We say, so we're in this mode of not just having this be an isolated incident, but it's part of the characteristic, and the fiber is to foster and be thinking of ways to reinvent and then reinvent again. And the final one I'll say is because, quite frankly, if you start to understand it, it's fun. And I believe God designed us to do so, that we have creative brains, We have creative minds. We have the ability to think through things and come up with concepts. This world was created out of nothing. There was a design into it, and I believe that we have the same ability to be creative and come up with all sorts of fun things. So those are sort of the reasons why it's important, why innovation even matters. Um, as much as Zoom might drive us bananas, it is a innovation that, quite frankly, has allowed a lot of businesses to continue to move during COVID. I mean, if it wasn't for Zoom, a lot of people just completely not be able to do a lot of the things they're able to do. And so, you think about the light bulb, you think about all these things that we have today, which we just kind of take for granted, but somebody went through a painstaking exercise to try to come up with innovative things that we use today. So I just want to give you a couple of examples. Quite frankly, our phase one and phase two is a byproduct of innovation, years of trying and testing and seeing what's the best way to develop a process. If you think about phase one and phase two, has really been a byproduct of a lot of failure, a lot of successful failures. We talk about is where we're going back and saying what happened and what do we need to do better and how do we improve in this area. All of phase one and phase two really is that. It's an outflow of innovation that we use in our systems and our processes. And so that is an innovative thing that we've come up with over time that has been, I believe, a success. And it's pretty instrumental for us to be very proactive in dealing with our clients because we have a very disciplined approach to how we walk through the process, and it forces conversations to happen, and it allows us to have innovation and success. The University for New Buyers, we've talked about this, and I know that Dan and Tom are knee deep in building this out. The university that screens clients, allows them to get educated, allows us to delegate that and not have to spend so much time with clients going through it, is an innovation. And it's a way to add value to commercial brokers who are going to have clients come in. And it's really birthed out of a frustration from the commercial brokers where somebody comes in, they don't know what they're doing. They don't have any idea of how to buy a building. They don't know what's all involved. So as opposed to us spending all that manpower, it's a great innovation to be able to offload and send somebody through a university for them to be educated. So that's a value proposition. For them to be screened out too, to make sure that they can actually be qualified. And it's a benefit for the commercial broker as well. So there's this really trifecta that goes on through that process of the University for New Buyers. Intercapital, which is a nationwide platform that was started back in 2009. And it actually came out of the recession, the Great Recession that we went through. And I woke up at about 2:00 in the morning in a deep sweat, trying to figure out how the heck I was going to continue this company. I mean, it was really on the verge of the end. And this idea of collaborating with other companies across the country to try to close loans was birthed out of that. And it's been a raving success, and it's continued to thrive today. But that was an innovation that came out of some trials, difficult situations. H3, which is a organization that was started a couple of years ago, which has been very instrumental in growing young leaders as well as also giving back tremendously to the community, was an innovation and an idea birthed out of three concepts, which is high integrity, high connecting, and high givers. Um, Unstuck is a new program that we're launching for clients and also for recruiting. That's a new innovative idea that you guys will learn more about in the future. And then also hopefromfear.com, um, which is going to be the mechanism we're going to use to make these packets, these gift packets for moms, single moms that are on the verge of homelessness, that we can bless them. So those are just some of the examples. I'm just kind of giving you some ideas of the fact that Integrity Capital's always been about innovation, and it's just part of who we are. It's part of the growth process. It's not necessarily a destination, as opposed to it's just part of the process of us growing, I guess is what I'm getting at. So I'm going to hit the pause button there for a minute and just see if anybody has any comments or things that they want me to clarify or anything before we go forward.
Can you go a little bit into the Intercapital? I was just curious what exactly.
Yeah, Intercapital is a nationwide platform that is companies our size all across the country, all the way from coast to coast, Florida, New York, Texas, Illinois, Missouri, California, Las Vegas. So representing all the major states, we meet once a month, and it is a collaborative group tank of sharing market knowledge. So we share what's going on in our markets, and then we also share lenders. And so it's people that have a mentality that sharing is better than hoarding. And so I pitched this idea to 30 companies back in 2009. And I said, if your mentality is we can do more together and you're willing to share, then I said, this will be a real success. If you're not, and you're kind of like, don't touch my cheese, I said, then, this isn't going to work for you. Half of them said yes. The other half said pound sand. I'm not going to open up my, stuff. So they share. If we run into a struggle or can't get a loan done, and I'm trying to do something over in Florida, then I could just call somebody and say, hey, I need help. And he'll open up his database and say, talk to so-and-so. So, and quite frankly, we've gotten some big deals done that I never would have gotten done if it weren't for this. And it was one of the reasons we still were able to stay in business. So it just kind of took on a life of its own. It was just quite honestly, it was out of desperation. It's kind of like when you're on the 5-yard line and you have 20 seconds left in the football game and you kind of throw a Hail Mary, and you hope the guy catches it in the end zone. And so that just sort of is what happened. But that's
great. Kudos to you, Dave.
Gosh, yes, middle of the night.
Well, I was you guys will find this a little bit weird, but I'm hardwired this way. But I was running super early, and I was having a panic attack that I might actually have to go get a job. And I know that sounds a little strange, but I've never really had a job. I've always just kind of run my own company. So I think that sort of spurred me on to it. So some people think the opposite, and not one's not better than the other. It's just sort of some of the thing that popped in my mind. So, so yeah.
Look at you now.
Well, a lot of gray hair is what you see. But so the question is how, so you we go, okay, well, why does it even matter? Because I'm can be a skeptic at times. So I'm like, why does that even matter? There's some examples of what has happened out of innovation, which is really the things that grow. In fact, I was just reading an article that showed all the top 50 companies in the world that are the most innovative, and it actually shows a growth metric of how much more they grew by an exponential amount just because of innovation. So it's just sort of one of those things that um, is just part of our DNA. So, um, so then the question is how. Um, and there's really, I think, four things that we can focus on, which is whenever you're innovating, the first place you're always going to start is a strategic assessment. And so I just call it SWOT. You guys have probably heard that before. It's an acronym that's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And actually, at the very beginning of the year, John and I met for about a half a day and we just did a SWOT analysis. And so what we did is we looked at our company and said, what are all of our strengths? What do we do really well? What are our weaknesses? Where are we, deficient? What are some opportunities out there? And then what are some threats, that we could see coming down the road? And that's really how we came up with some of the objectives for 2021. And we do that every year. We just try to be really honest and say, what do we do really well? Where are we really weak? Where are some opportunities for us and what are some threats, down the road? And so that's the same thing you do when you're trying to innovate. You're like, well, where are we? Where are the holes, in the boat, so to speak, right? And then, and then the second thing we really do is, does it align? So we might come up with an idea and go, that's awesome. This looks like a good idea, but then we say, does it align with our core vision and mission? And if the answer is no, you guys already know the answer. We just toss it because, if it doesn't fit with our core vision and who we are, we just sort of throw it by the wayside. And so that's the place you just always start. You go, where do we need some help? Now think about some of the things we're doing right now. We know that we're deficient right now with a capital markets person. Means that we don't have somebody who's dedicated to constantly calling lenders, weeding through new ones, fostering the old ones. And so that's what we're trying to hire for, just because we know it's a deficiency. We are weak in that area. And it's not we don't want to, we just don't have the bandwidth. So we just have to figure it out. And so we're coming up with this innovative internship program where we can kind of grow somebody into that position. And Tom is taking the charge on that. So good job, Tom. Don't, we know you won't fail us.
That's a lot of pressure.
As my coach used to say, don't blow it. So there you go.
Yeah.
So the first place we start is we just kind of go, I mean, think about this. This is pretty typical in all of your lives. If you ever go into the gym or you go hire a coach, the first thing they do is they kind of do a test, right? What's your weight? What are you trying to accomplish? How's your blood pressure? They do this whole thing to just see like where you at. And because then, they have to be really honest. The same thing happens if you're trying to figure out where you are financially. You have to kind of open up your bank accounts and see how much am I spending, and that could be a little painful. You're like, I don't know if I want to do that, but that's how you can grow. So you have to just kind of take down the guards and say, okay, what's going on here? So doctors do the same thing, right? They take your blood pressure and they take your temperature and all these other things to see where you are. So before we go on, does that all make sense? That first step of just trying to take an assessment as to where that is. You guys all on board with that, or any questions?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. The second thing is to what I call concept and solution design. So once you say, okay, I think I know where the deficiency is, I think I understand where there's a need, then the next step is to what I call conceptualize. You probably hear that word, or sometimes you'll hear this new fancy word called ideation. And it's a fancy word for, just coming up with a concept, what are you going to try to do? And we did this as a company. If you remember what the university idea, we were kind of ideation and just trying to spitball ideas back and forth. So it's kind of like you would everybody's in a room and you pull out the big whiteboard and you just start, throwing ideas together. Like, what would be some ideas? And some things to think about, questions, is what best technologies could be leveraged in this area? That's one of the questions you can ask. What are some of the technologies we could do to leverage this area? Maybe there's something already out there that we could just, clip into. And, Lana, we tried this with Lender Fit, just didn't work, but we tried, right? And we just thought, well, maybe this will work, so we gave it a shot. But it just didn't, didn't meet our criteria. The second thing is, what can we already leverage? So that's always a good question. Sometimes you don't need to go that far. Sometimes you just kind of go like, well, what do we already have that we could leverage and take advantage of, And that's actually what we did, Lana. If you remember, we kind of go, well, we got Salesforce. So could we already do this in Salesforce? Could we, and we found out the answer is yes, we can. So we just decided to scratch the Lender Fit and just try to do something in-house. So,
Which is a good thing because we're already in Salesforce to a degree. So it's not starting from scratch, getting everybody used to a new program. So that worked out well.
exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing too, is this idea of, part of it is centralization. We want to have something all on the same platform and makes things more efficient and, just gets everybody on the same page. Kind of like how everybody in our company just loves MacBook and wants to be on a Mac and stuff like that.
Oh, what?
What? Is it?
I'm learning to love it.
What's the other company you work at, Dave?
I'm just kind of telling you the fantasy land that I live in.
Yeah, it'll stay a fantasy.
It's the world of make believe of Mr. Rogers.
I'm living through Pat right now. I'm like, no.
Yeah, you're vicariously living through Pat.
Yes.
So the third thing is, what is required to start it? You start kind of saying, okay, we conceptually, come up with this, but like, what's it going to take, to start something like that, and how much would it cost? And, so you start just laying out this little roadmap as to what steps would you need to take, what's realistic right now. I mean, for me, back in the recession days, when we were, broke as a joke, what was realistic back then was very different than now. So it was, I was kind of like, well, if I could just get a loan closed, that would be a success, so let's just start with something small, let's just get money coming in the door. And thankfully we were able to do that. But, and then really, what are the next steps? You just kind of say, well, what next steps do we take? And so part of that conceptualization is just literally, if you visualize, you're in a group, you're with your team, you're kind of, you're all in the room, and you've got your whiteboard, and you're just throwing all these ideas together, and you're just letting your mind answer a different question. And here's what I mean by that. We were designed to have questions become very powerful for us. So people that ask, there's two pathways in a lot of instances. One pathway is, I can't do that. Where we just shut everything off and say, I can't do that. No way I can do that. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I'm a realist. I mean, there are things you just can't do. But in a lot of instances, we have to ask a different question, which is how can we? What would be some ways we can do that? And I'll give you a real simple example, but I think it'll drive home the point. So my wife and I learned this exercise when we were first married, um, by some mentors of ours, and they said, whenever you run into a problem, I want you to pull out this document, and you guys are going to literally come up with 10 ideas on how you could solve the problem. And the only rule is there's no dumb ideas, and each of you has to come up with 5. And it could be as outlandish as you want, it doesn't matter, but just come up with 10 ideas, and you have to come up with 10. You can't do 5, or you just have to do 10. And so one night, the one of our kids was sick, and we really wanted to go on a date night, but babysitter wasn't going to come over with a sick kid. And so, my wife said, there's no way we can go out. And I said, let's just do that problem solving thing right now. And she said, there's no way. And I said, let's just do it. Let's just try. And so we did it, and we came up with 10 ideas. And the very last idea we came up with was the thing. And we said, well, what if we waited till the kid fell asleep, and then the babysitter could come over and just sit in the living room? Then she wouldn't get sick. And so we were able to go on a date, right? But and it's a simple example, but the point is when we were open to the idea of there potentially could be a solution, and there was, we were able to come up with something and have a positive result. So whenever we're conceptualizing, I always want us to just be open to possibilities, and not let our mind just kind of go like, yeah, that's not possible, but just be open to what's possible. And I think that's when you start to see some fun things happen. So before I go on that, any comments, thoughts, questions, or anything like that?
No, no, I like that. I like because we've done that with I guess problems in the past with the spitballing ideas, and I like it because even sometimes like the off the wall ideas are kind of like, yeah, that's off the wall, but it leads to something that's not quite off the wall. So I think it's worth just throwing everything out there. What are the options? What are the possibilities?
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. I mean, you and I just went through this exercise with Terrence. It was just like, okay, what are we gonna do here? So we're just sort of kicking ideas around until something worked. So yeah, I just think it's part of our DNA. It's just we have to be open to solutions, and ideas. The third one is just when you're done with all that, then you have to test. So when you have a general concept and idea, you have to go through a testing phase. And what this means is you have to start answering these questions. What is success? I think that's a really, really important question, because if you don't know what success is for this particular initiative or what you're trying to accomplish, and quite frankly, that's anything, then you're going to be really frustrated. Even when you come into work every day, you got to have some idea like what's success for me, today, and then it's clear. So we're always trying to get to clarity. So you want to really drive home that thing. Well, what would success look like for us if we do this? And it is good. We just need to know what is success, because then what it is. It's kind of like, hey, I want you to shoot at the target, and you go, well, what's the target? Or hey, let's go on a trip. Where? Or the question I always get from clients is, what are interest rates? Like on what? Apartment, office, So the idea of what is success is the idea of clarification, trying to clarify what is success. The second one that goes, I think, really hand in glove with this is how do we measure this? One of the things, if you haven't been for long, Pat, you'll find out is we're really big into measuring. How do we monitor and measure what is success how much time, what are some of the metrics, how many touches did we make today? We're always trying to say, how do we measure that success? Because it's kind of hard to have some idea of success unless you have some measuring tool, and so we're always kind of saying, like, how do you turn that into something where you can actually measure what success would look like, so you have something to shoot for. um, and then the third one here is, what is everyone's role? So it's another one you want to ask in that test phase, is say, well, what would be our role in each of these sections, where we would know what I'm supposed to be doing, or what I'm responsible for, what is, Pat responsible for, what is Lana, Tom, Dan, and whoever else we bring on. Those are the kinds of things that we need to know. Who's responsible for what. Lana does this all the time. Pat will do this as well. When you do a kickoff call, part of that thing is defining everybody's role. Who's going to do this? Who's responsible for that? And that creates a sense of accountability when we're walking through projects. And then the next one is, what data do we collect? So what information are we gathering through this process that's going to be relevant versus not relevant when you're working on a project? And then the final one, which again goes hand in glove with so some of this is synonymous, is a KPI. And you guys are probably wondering, what is a KPI? And it is a key performance index. So that's just a fancy way of saying we have a very particular measurable that we look at. So for example, in our company, one of the things we look at is, how many touches did the associates make today? And out of those touches, how many people did they talk to? So a KPI would be the ratio of people they spoke to the amount of people they called. So let's say that's 50%. So we want to know that number. That tells us something. That tells us that, hey, every time you make 10 phone calls, chances are you're going to get 5 people on the phone, right? So that's good information for us to be able to know. And that is usually the number, so that when future people come into the company and they're actually saying, well, gosh, how do I know I'm going to have success? We can really quickly tell them, hey, if you make 100 phone calls, you're going to talk to half of those people. And out of half of those people, you're probably going to pick up, 20% of them are going to have an opportunity. And out of 20% that give you an opportunity, you're going to close probably 5% of those, So that's just a good thing for them to go, wow, okay, so I can know that if I want to increase my income, I just have to do these things, right? So those are the kinds of things that we like to measure, so that we can do some forecasting. So I'll hit stop there for a minute. Does that make sense, or is there anything that's fuzzy, or you guys following me on that?
Yes.
It makes sense.
Okay. Hopefully this isn't boring you to death. But the final one is launch. Okay, so once you've gone through this process, you've tested everything, and you're ready to at least do something, what we do is we want to do what's called a proof of concept, or an MVP. A proof of concept and the MVP are synonymous. They're about the same thing. But one of the things in the software world is they have what's called an MVP, or a minimum viable product. So they will come up with something that is, just enough to get it out into somebody's hand, to get feedback and start to see if it's something the market accepts or not. What they used to do is they would build a huge software. They do the whole thing. It would take them 3 years, and then they would launch it, and it'd be a flop. And they could have saved themselves, millions of dollars and a lot of headache if they would have just had a very basic product within maybe 5 to 6 months, took it out to the market, see if the market even wants it. The market may say, well, I don't care. I mean, it's, that's not what I want. Or the market says, yes, but I'd rather do this, this, and this. And then they can go back and tweak that and start refining it. So the concept behind a minimum viable product is you're doing just enough for the market to be able to experience it and start to give you feedback real fast. And the feedback is, hey, I like what you're doing, or, that's a dumb idea, and we're not into it. And so that, that was one of the things with Inner Capital. I just kind of threw this idea together on a piece of paper. I got 30 people on a phone call, and half of them said I'm on board. So it wasn't, I didn't spend, months and months trying to come up with a perfect plan. I just did enough. And by the way, that's one of our leadership characteristics that we focus on, which is actually, this idea of, get to 70% and then launch. That's the idea of don't get into the perfectionist mentality. Just do enough to get ready and then go do it, because a mediocre plan engaged is better than a perfect plan that's never gets off the shelf, if that makes sense, right? You guys have probably heard that before. And so we want to just at least get something moving, and then we'll find out real fast whether it's going to have some teeth or not. And most of the stuff, just to be candid with you, a lot of the stuff will just fail. But you have to remember at our firm, we actually celebrate that. So we celebrate successful failure here. We don't shy away from it, because I believe that if you are trying and falling on your face, so to speak, you're going to get back up and you're going to learn from it. And then you just keep trying until it works. And so, kids do this all the time, right? They try to walk, they fall on their little behind, they get back up, and eventually after a while, all the parents are flipping their lid, as the kid's walking, but there was a lot of falling down that took place. So just kind of remember that. So that's really the general concept, the how, strategic assessment, conceptualizing, testing, and then launching, and then grouping back up. So, innovation is really something that is a bedrock. Quite frankly, it's probably one of the bedrocks of our nation. I mean, you think about all the innovations that have taken place and the concepts people have come up with and the ideas. It's a wonderful thing applied in the right way that can help enhance, people's experiences at the end of the day. So then you say, well, okay, well, what's next? What does this even mean? And I just would say this, because I'm a big believer in just baby steps. If you guys have ever seen that movie, What About Bob? If you remember What About Bob, if you remember one of the things his baby steps to the elevator, right? That was Bob's statement. And so I'm kind of the same ilk that, just in our weekly check-in, we're just going to start discussing like, what's one little simple area? And sometimes we think of innovation and we kind of get a little overwhelmed because we're going, gosh, Dave, I got to do this huge thing. And my answer is no. It's the little things that make the biggest impact. So there might be a little small area that you run into that is a frustration. That's usually a good indicator if there's an opportunity for innovation, is if you're running into frustration. And then you kind of say, well, gosh, how do we do this different so that we can have a different experience? I mean, quite frankly, Pat's experience coming on, which was a failure on our part, was the way that we,
Wow.
was.
Oh, you mean the process, not Pat
process,
joining.
not
I was all
Pat.
like, wow.
No,
Dave's showing his nasty side today.
Pat
I knew
was,
what you meant.
Pat was the success. We were the failure. I was the failure. But, you know,
Oh,
the idea behind that is that we go, gosh, that was a failure. And what do we learn from that? And now we've implemented a new process, you know, to try to mitigate that as best as we can. We try to learn from these things so that we can have a better experience going forward. So think about those things that you run into that are natural, you know, frustrations, or they could just be, gosh, this seems like a step that doesn't need to be there, or man, there just seems like a better way to do this. Just be thinking that way as you're doing your daily stuff. And I think what you'll find is there are probably so many things that you can do to come up with very small innovations that really can make for a totally new experience, not only for you, but for the client at the end of the day. So that's just one of the challenges I leave us with, is that when we meet on a weekly basis, I just want you to be thinking of what are some things that I'm seeing, and you might not even have a clear idea, but you might even identify this is an area of frustration, trying to figure out if there's a better way to do it. I think that's a start. You know, it's a good way to get yourself to start to think about how could this be better, uh, just by some simple tweaking and things like that. So that's kind of my challenge to us as we're going through the process and as we're growing, because you know that's going to be part of our success, is just innovating. So that's your teaching today on innovation. And I guess before we end, is there any comments or things you'd like to share?